Dorothy Henderson pressed her hands into the sleeves of her sweater, fingers curled tight as she stared out through the frosted kitchen window. The Iowa wind howled with a dry, merciless voice, rattling the panes like a warning. In Cedar Rapids, January came with an unforgiving sharpness, the kind that burrowed into the joints and lingered in old bones. Her breath fogged the glass as she looked out into her snow-draped backyard. The feeders Harold had built still hung from the maple tree, emptied, now ignored by birds too smart to stick around this time of year. Dorothy made a mental note to refill them. Not that it mattered. She hadn't seen a cardinal in weeks. Maybe they'd forgotten about her too. She sighed and turned away from the window, moving slowly toward the counter where the kettle was heating. She had rationed her heating oil again, lowering the thermostat to 58 degrees. The electric blanket in her bedroom did most of the work now. But mornings like this, the kind that clawed straight through layers of wool and resolve, made even strong tea feel useless. The house was quiet. It had been for years now. 12 winters had passed since Harold died. She still remembered the sound of his steps down the hallway, the smell of his shaving cream in, the mornings, the way he called her Dot, like it was a secret name only he had the right to use. After he was gone, the house hadn't just gotten quieter, it had gotten heavier. A stack of unopened mail sat on the counter, bills, pharmacy reminders, an overdue notice from Mid-American Energy she hadn't had the courage to open. Her fingers hesitated over it now before brushing it aside. Tea first. The kettle screamed and she poured hot water over a well-worn bag of Earl Grey. One more cup, stretched over 2 steeps, just like she always did when she reached the end of the box. She moved back to the kitchen table, her favorite chair, Harold's across from her, still slightly pulled out, like he might join her if she waited long enough. On the table lay her pill organizer. The Monday square was empty. She frowned. Had she already taken her heart medication, or did she just think she had? She hated that she couldn't remember. She hated more that the bottle only had 3 tablets left. The phone rang. Dorothy jumped slightly, her mug clinking against the saucer. She glanced at the old landline as it blinked. Only one person still used that number these days. "Ellie?" she answered, her voice rough from disuse. "I knew you'd still be sitting there freezing your behind off." Ellie Chen's voice burst through the receiver like sunshine. "You turned up the heat yet?" "I'm fine," Dorothy lied, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You're too proud for your own good. Let me bring over some extra blankets." "I don't need. I'm not asking. I'm telling." Dorothy allowed herself a small smile. Ellie had been her best friend since high school. In a world that had changed beyond recognition, her neighborhood, her body, even her relationship with her children, Ellie was a constant, stubborn, sharp-tongued, and absolutely loyal. "There's an estate sale on Elm Street this afternoon," Ellie continued. "Thought we'd go dig around, get you out of that cave for a few hours." Dorothy hesitated. "I really shouldn't spend—" "It's free to look," Ellie interrupted. "And you need to see sunlight before you turn into one of those mushrooms your son's always going on about." Dorothy laughed, despite herself. "Fine, but you're driving." "You bet your ass I am." An hour later, Dorothy stood by the door, adjusting the collar of her wool coat and patting her hair into place. She eyed herself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, yes, but not defeated. She applied a little lipstick, something soft, nothing too showy, and grabbed her envelope of just-in-case money. $12. That was all she had to spare for the week. She pressed it into her coat pocket like it weighed 100 pounds. Outside, Ellie's Buick coughed to life in the driveway. Dorothy stepped into the cold, the icy air biting at her cheeks, and felt something stir in her chest. Not warmth exactly, but motion. She hadn't left the house in days. Maybe Ellie was right. As they pulled away from the curb, the silence between them was easy, comfortable. "How's Michael?" Ellie asked after a while. "Busy," Dorothy replied. "His firm is expanding." Ellie made a non-committal noise. "And Rebecca?" Dorothy hesitated. "She sent me a link last week to a place in Phoenix, an assisted living facility." Ellie's hands tightened on the wheel. "You're not going." I told her the same. "Good. You're not ready for that." "Not even close." Dorothy stared out the window at the passing houses. "She said I was being stubborn, that I'm holding on to a house too big for one person. She doesn't understand. They never do, until it's them." Dorothy nodded, the lump in her throat familiar now. It had become a part of her, a quiet, persistent ache lodged between memory and dignity. The estate sale was already underway when Ellie pulled up in front of the Whitmore house on Elm Street. It was one of those old two-story colonials with green shutters and a wraparound porch, the kind of home that still whispered about better decades. A few cars were parked haphazardly along the curb, and a hand-lettered sign near the driveway read, "Everything must go. Final weekend." "Why are these sales always so depressing?" Dorothy asked as Ellie shut off the engine. "Because they remind us we'll all end up as price tags someday," Ellie replied, grabbing her tote bag. "Come on, let's go be vultures with taste." Inside, the house smelled faintly of lemon polish and something older, dust maybe, or time. The furniture had been pushed to the sides of the rooms to make space for folding tables stacked with belongings, porcelain figurines, costume, jewelry tangled in velvet boxes, hardcover books with worn spines, and stacks of old records nobody under 50 would recognize. Dorothy wandered, careful not to bump into the others moving silently through the rooms. It was strange how people behaved at these sales, like mourners at a wake, speaking in hushed tones, examining every object with both curiosity and guilt. She found herself drawn toward a back room, perhaps once a study. It was quieter here. A single table stood in the center, and on it sat an assortment of hats, gloves, and scarves. Faded elegance, forgotten style. Then she saw it. A vintage cloche hat, pristine beige wool with a small satin ribbon tucked delicately to one side. Her breath caught. It was nearly identical to the one her mother used to wear in the black and white photos that lined the hallway of her childhood home. The same curve of the brim, the same gentle slant. It looked like it belonged to another world. And somehow, still, it belonged to her. She reached out, almost reverently, and lifted the hat. The lining was smooth, well-preserved. No name, no label, just time sewn into fabric. "You've got a good eye," a voice said behind her. Dorothy turned to see a woman about her age, maybe younger, with graying hair pulled back in a bun. Her blouse was wrinkled, and her eyes had that hollowed, sleepless look Dorothy recognized too well. "I'm sorry," Dorothy said quickly. "I didn't mean—" No, the woman interrupted. "It's all for sale, everything." Dorothy held up the hat. "It's beautiful. Are you sure?" The woman nodded. $12. Dorothy blinked. "This hat? It could be worth $100 easily." "Doesn't matter," the woman said flatly. "I'm moving into assisted care tomorrow. Everything has to be gone by Sunday." Dorothy paused, then slowly reached into her coat and removed her envelope. She counted 12 crisp $1 bills, her last discretionary money for the month, and handed them over. The woman took the bills without looking at them. "Thank you." Dorothy gave a soft smile. "Your mother had excellent taste." The woman's face twitched, like she'd heard something sour. She traveled a lot, mostly South America, brought back boxes of stuff. I don't even know what half of it is. There was something brittle in her tone, something that made Dorothy uncomfortable. "She always said she liked the weather down there," the woman added. "But I think she just didn't want to come home." Before Dorothy could ask more, the woman turned away and disappeared into another room. As she walked back through the house, holding the wrapped hat in her hands like a sacred object, Dorothy caught glimpses of other shoppers, giving the seller wary glances. A young couple abandoned a stack of scarves when the woman passed. An elderly man who had been examining pearl necklaces shuffled away, frowning. Outside, the wind cut sharper than before. Ellie was waiting by the car. "Find something?" she asked, noting the paper bundle in Dorothy's arms. Dorothy nodded. "A hat. It reminded me of my mother." Ellie opened the passenger door. "It's a bit strange, isn't it? That woman. She seemed like she was in a real rush to be rid of everything. She said she's going into a nursing facility." "I know, but still, that hat looked like it meant something." Dorothy hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe she just thought I'd like it." Ellie narrowed her eyes. "Or maybe it wanted to find you." Dorothy laughed, a short, surprised burst. "You make it sound like the hat has a mind of its own." "Some things do," Ellie said as she started the engine, "especially the ones we don't expect." Back at home, Dorothy placed the hat gently on her bed. She stood there a long moment, staring at it. There was something almost familiar in the curve of it, something her fingers seemed to recognize. She picked it up again and, with care, placed it on her head. In the mirror, she didn't see an old woman. She saw someone else, someone still elegant, still capable of turning heads. She adjusted the brim slightly. My mother would have smiled, she whispered. The next morning, Dorothy didn't reach for her robe first. She reached for the hat. It sat on the nightstand, framed by the early morning light slipping through the curtains. She placed it on her head with the kind of careful, deliberate reverence that reminded her of watching her mother prepare for Sunday Mass. There was a rhythm to it, an unspoken ceremony in the tilt of the brim, the soft smoothing of her hair underneath. For a moment she sat still, letting the quiet of the house settle around her. Then she stood, back a little straighter. She dressed with more care than usual, not because she had anywhere in particular to be, but because she realized she wanted to feel put together. It had been a long time since that had mattered. She added a silk scarf, a brooch she hadn't worn in over a decade, and even applied a touch of blush before heading out to the corner store for eggs and tea. The bell above the store door jingled as she stepped inside. The warmth of the small shop was a welcome contrast to the bitter wind outside. Behind the counter, the young man, Nick or Nate, she could never remember, looked up and did a small double take. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," he said, smiling. "That's a great hat." Dorothy blinked. "Oh, thank you. It's like old Hollywood or something. Really suits you." She felt herself stand a little taller. "That's very kind of you." As she moved through the narrow aisles, she noticed something strange. People looked at her, not in pity or indifference, but with a kind of respect, acknowledgement. It had been so long since she felt truly seen that she almost didn't recognize the sensation. At the pharmacy counter, the woman scanning her prescription renewals paused. "That's a beautiful hat," she said. "My grandmother used to wear something like that." Dorothy smiled again. "My mother did too. Classic never goes out of style." By the time Dorothy returned home, the chill in her bones had lifted. Not because of the temperature, but because of the warmth in her chest. It was a small thing, less than 20 words from strangers, but it built something solid inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time, presence. That Sunday she went to church. It was the first time in weeks, maybe months. She sat beside Ellie on the second pew, the hat resting perfectly atop her soft curls. The organist nodded in approval. During the second hymn, the pastor's wife leaned in and whispered, "You look absolutely beautiful, Dorothy." She didn't know what to say, so she simply smiled. She hadn't felt beautiful in over a decade. Not since Harold passed. Maybe not even before that. Ellie nudged her gently. "Told you the right hat could bring a woman back to life," Dorothy whispered back. "You might be right." Later that afternoon, Ellie helped her take a picture in the living room. "Just for fun," she said. "Let your kids see what their mother looks like when she's too good for assisted living." They tried a few different poses before Dorothy settled on one by the front window, with the afternoon sun lighting her face just so. She wasn't smiling widely, just a small, proud expression. Enough to say, "I'm still here." Ellie sent the photo to both Michael and Rebecca, despite Dorothy's protests. That evening, as Dorothy stood at the sink rinsing her teacup, her phone buzzed. A message from Michael, "You look beautiful, Mom." 2 minutes later, from Rebecca, "Gorgeous find. Where'd you get the hat?" Dorothy stared at the messages, stunned. She hadn't heard anything affectionate from Rebecca in months. The words felt like breadcrumbs across a long and thorny path. She replied simply, "Estate sale on Elm Street. Reminded me of Nana." No answer came that night, but it didn't matter. The door had cracked open. Over the next week, the routine settled into something unexpectedly bright. Dorothy wore the hat most days, sometimes inside, sometimes not. When she passed the mirror, she didn't avert her gaze like before. She lingered. Neighbors waved. One afternoon, Mickey, her grandson, called from Chicago. "Mom showed me your picture," he said. "Grandma, you look amazing. Seriously. Vintage queen vibes." Dorothy laughed. "You're a charmer. Can I show my friends?" "You can do what you want. It's just a hat." "No, it's not," Mickey replied. "It's a whole mood." She blushed. When was the last time she blushed? That night she went through old photo albums, pages thick with sepia and black and white. She found a picture of her mother standing in front of a grand archway in Buenos Aires, wearing a near-identical cloche hat. She was young then, smiling, proud. Dorothy traced the outline of the photo with one finger. "I see you now," she whispered. The itch began on the 8th day. It was subtle at first, like the faint tickle of a stray hair brushing the rim of her right ear. Dorothy rubbed at it absently while washing dishes, then again while brushing her hair before bed. She told herself it was nothing, just dry air, or maybe a stray thread from the hat's lining. But by the next morning, the sensation had deepened. It wasn't painful, not exactly, just persistent, a tiny nag that she couldn't quite reach. She ran a Q-tip gently along the outer canal, as far as she dared. Nothing. No wax, no redness, just irritation. "You sure you're not catching a cold?" Ellie asked a few days later, as they sat in the kitchen sipping coffee. Dorothy winced slightly as she adjusted the hat on her head. Half the people at church were sniffling. "It's probably nothing. Maybe a sinus thing. Could be allergies. Or just the dry air in this old house," Ellie offered. Dorothy nodded, grateful for the excuse. Still, the itching didn't go away. In fact, it seemed worse when she wore the hat. She noticed it most while walking. The air pressed against her ear, and sometimes it throbbed afterward, like something inside was swelling with pressure. She tried not to think about it. Instead, she focused on maintaining her newfound rhythm, the daily walk to the store, the renewed conversations with neighbors, the image of herself in the mirror, upright, styled, present. But by the 12th day, irritation had turned to discomfort. She woke one morning to a strange, dull ache deep inside her ear. The skin around it felt tender to the touch, and her hearing seemed slightly muffled, like she was underwater. Her balance was off, too. Subtle, but enough to make her clutch the edge of the sink when she bent to rinse her teacup. That evening, while settling into bed, she pulled her pillow close and caught a faint odor, sour, strange, unpleasant. She sniffed the pillowcase, frowning, then leaned closer and realized the smell wasn't coming from the fabric. It was coming from her. She removed the hat and set it aside, blinking as the scent clung to her fingertips. She lifted it to her nose again and frowned. The band inside, soft and clean just days ago, now smelled faintly of something musky and old. "Maybe it's just me," she muttered, trying to laugh at herself. She rubbed some mentholated balm along her temples and wrapped a warm compress around her head. But sleep wouldn't come. Her ear ached, not in a sharp screaming way, but in a low nagging pulse, something foreign, something not quite right. By the morning of day 13, the smell had worsened. So had her symptoms. Her pillow showed faint yellow stains. When she pressed the skin below her ear, it throbbed and burned. There was a tightness there now, a pressure, like something was trapped and pushing outward. Still, she said nothing. She knew what would happen if she called her doctor. Tests, expenses, maybe a referral to a specialist. And with Rebecca always looking for reasons to label her incapable of independence, this would be just another excuse, another notch in the argument for assisted living. So she did what she had learned to do best over the years. She endured. The pain ebbed and flowed. Some hours were bearable. Others came with flashes of dizziness and sharp stabbing sensations that made her grip countertops for balance. Her hearing continued to decline, like a radio slowly losing its signal. Then Mickey called. "Grandma? You okay?" His voice was bright, cheerful, and it pierced her like a blade. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she said, trying to sound normal. "You sure? You sound tired. Just didn't sleep well, that's all." There was a pause. "Maybe you should see someone? Like a doctor?" "It's just the dry air," she said firmly. "Still, if it's affecting your hearing, I'm not going deaf," she snapped. Silence followed. "I didn't mean it like that," Mickey said, more gently. Dorothy exhaled slowly. "I know, love. I'm just tired." After they hung up, she sat in her chair for a long while, cradling a warm mug that had long gone cold. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The pain was no longer a whisper, it was a roar. That night, as she reached for the hat on her dresser, she hesitated. She picked it up slowly, studying it in the lamplight. It looked the same, elegant, smooth, perfectly shaped. But the band inside had darkened slightly, and when she lifted it to her nose again, the odor was stronger. Not just musty, but rancid, rotting. Her stomach turned. She dropped the hat onto the dresser and took a step back. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, from fear, but fear was a luxury. She had to be practical, just a wash, she told herself. The lining needed a clean. Old fabric could do that. Still, she didn't wear it the next morning. When Ellie called at 7:00 a.m., Dorothy didn't answer with her usual lightness. "Dot," Ellie's voice sharpened. "You sound awful." "It's my ear," she admitted finally. I think something's wrong." There was a pause. Then Ellie's voice, firm and clear. "I'm coming over." and don't you dare argue with me." By the time Ellie arrived, Dorothy was seated in her kitchen, one hand pressed gently against her ear, her shoulders hunched and still. The light in the room felt off, dimmed, filtered through heavy clouds and the quiet ache of something about to break. Ellie took one look at her friend and didn't even bother with small talk. "Get your coat," she said. "We're going—" Dorothy tried to argue, but her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Ellie simply placed a hand on her shoulder and squeezed. Firm, kind, no room for refusal. 15 minutes later, they walked into Cedar Rapids Family Clinic. The front desk receptionist, Linda Martinez, glanced up from her screen and immediately stood. "Mrs. Henderson?" she said, her eyes narrowing at Dorothy's pale face and the tissue clenched in her hand. "Hang on, just a second." She disappeared through the door behind her, and a moment later, Dr. Richardson himself appeared. He was in his early 60s, gray at the temples, his voice always calm, his eyes sharp. He had known Dorothy since Harold died, and had watched the slow curve of her resilience turning inward. "Dot," he said gently, stepping into the waiting room. "Come on back." Ellie followed them down the hallway like a sentinel. In the exam room, Dorothy perched on the edge of the table, blinking against the fluorescent lights. "What's going on?" Dr. Richardson asked, sitting across from her, not opening a chart, not touching a pen, just listening. Dorothy hesitated. "It's my ear," she said finally. "It's been itching for days and hurting, and there's something coming out." Richardson nodded slowly. "Which ear?" "Right." He leaned forward. "And when did it start?" She shrugged. "A week ago? Maybe more." Ellie stepped in. "It's been at least 2 weeks, and she's been getting dizzy. She hasn't told anyone." Richardson gave Dorothy a look. "You should have come in sooner. I didn't want to make a fuss. You wouldn't be here if it were just a fuss." He stood and moved behind her. "Let's take a look." He donned gloves, then gently pulled her earlobe back, peering into her canal with an otoscope. For a few seconds there was only silence, then a sharp intake of breath. Dorothy stiffened. "What?" "I'm not sure yet." He turned to the nurse call button and pressed it. "Let's irrigate first, get a better view." Minutes later, Nurse Kathy Williams entered the room with a tray and warm saline. She gave Dorothy a warm smile, one of practiced ease, but her eyes flicked nervously toward Richardson. "You ready, Mrs. Henderson?" she asked. Dorothy nodded. Kathy tilted her head slightly and began the irrigation process. Warm saline streamed gently into her ear, washing over the inflammation. A plastic basin caught the outflow. They all leaned in, watching the water swirl. Then Kathy froze. She stepped back, eyes wide. The basin in her hands shook. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Richardson moved closer. In the clear water something moved. Not debris, not wax, but something alive, small, pale, and writhing. Larvae. Dorothy didn't see it at first, but she saw the horror in their faces. "What is it?" she asked, voice trembling. "What's wrong?" Richardson exhaled slowly, forcing composure back into his features. "Kathy, hand me the scope." He inserted the device again, this time even more carefully. His expression darkened. "There are multiple organisms," he said quietly. "Larvae, possibly maggots, advanced stage." Kathy took a sharp step back, nearly dropping the tray. "Oh my God," she muttered. Dorothy sat frozen, her heart thudding in her throat. "You're saying there's something alive? Inside me?" Richardson turned to her, measured and calm. "Yes, and we need to act quickly. This isn't a typical infection. But how? How could something like that?" He stood, stripped off his gloves and walked to the phone. "I'm calling the state health department. They'll loop in the CDC. Dorothy stared down at her hands. "Is it going to kill me?" "We don't know," he said gently, "but we're not taking chances." The next few hours blurred into a strange dance of medical urgency. The exam room was locked down. Staff cleared the hallway. Dorothy was moved into a sealed, negative pressure room with glass walls and buzzing vents. Hazmat suits arrived by mid-afternoon. A woman introduced herself through the barrier as Dr. Emily Santos from the CDC. Tall, efficient, with eyes like sharpened slate, she spoke through a voice amplifier inside her suit. "Mrs. Henderson, I know this is frightening, but we're here to help you." Dorothy nodded, unable to form words. "We believe this is an infestation of a tropical species," Santos continued. "They're not native to this region. but we'll do everything we can." Ellie was allowed to stay just outside the glass. Her palm rested on the surface as she watched her friend lying on the bed, pale and quiet, like a fragile artifact sealed away for preservation. By evening, Dorothy was no longer afraid of dying. She was afraid of being seen this way, as a specimen, a headline, a medical anomaly. A nurse entered the chamber to take samples. Dorothy asked softly, "Will they have to operate?" "We don't know yet," the nurse said. "We're waiting on CDC guidance." Later, when Richardson returned in his scrubs, she looked up at him, exhausted. "Will I hear again?" He didn't answer right away. Dr. Emily Santos stood in the observation bay outside Dorothy's containment room, arms folded tightly across her chest. The sample under the microscope had confirmed her initial suspicion and deepened it. The larvae weren't random, they weren't environmental, they were tropical, and more than that, they were targeted. "These are human botfly larvae," she said to her assistant, a young man in a similar hazmat suit. "Dermatobia hominis, native to Central and South America. But how the hell did they get inside someone who's never left Iowa?" Santos didn't answer right away. Her eyes lingered on the woman behind the glass. Dorothy Henderson lay still on the bed, one hand occasionally drifting to her bandaged ear as if trying to understand what had been growing inside her for days. "We need to trace every foreign object she's come into contact with over the past month," Santos said. She stepped into the adjoining interview room, where Ellie Chen sat alone, arms wrapped around herself, watching Dorothy, with visible pain. "Miss Chen," Santos said through her mask, "can you tell me if Dorothy has traveled recently? Received any packages? Visitors from abroad?" Ellie shook her head. "She hasn't left Cedar Rapids in years. And no one visits but me. Has she purchased anything unusual lately? Anything secondhand? Imported?" Ellie blinked. "There was a hat." Santos leaned forward. "What kind of hat?" "A vintage cloche. She got it at an estate sale on Elm Street 2 weeks ago." Santos straightened. "Where is it now?" "At her house, probably. Unless they brought it in with her things." Within the hour, CDC agents entered Dorothy's home under biohazard protocol. They found the hat resting on her dresser, carefully placed apart from her clothes. They bagged it, sealed it, and transported it back to the clinic. Santos herself examined it under sterile conditions. The interior band of the hat, while visually pristine, had small, nearly invisible tears in the stitching. Under ultraviolet light, Santos saw what she'd feared: organic residue, traces of biological activity, and worse, clusters of unhatched larvae. "This thing was seeded," she said aloud, deliberately. Meanwhile, inside the containment chamber, Dorothy was regaining strength and confusion. Richardson visited in full gear, holding a clipboard but wearing the expression of a man who hated bureaucracy. "Dorothy," he began carefully, "we need to ask you about the hat you bought." She nodded weakly. "The one from the estate sale. Can you tell me about the seller?" Her name was Patricia Whitmore. She said she was moving into assisted living. Her mother had traveled through South America. Richardson nodded. "Did she say where exactly?" "She didn't, just mainly South America. She didn't seem well. She looked scared." Richardson exchanged a glance with Santos, who stood just beyond the glass. Outside, the investigation shifted gears. CDC cross-referenced Patricia Whitmore's name with medical records, property ownership, and public health databases. The result came back within hours. Patricia Whitmore had been a resident of Sunset Manor. Ellie, upon hearing the name, looked up sharply. "That's the place Rebecca sent Dorothy to last year, when she had that fall." "What fall?" Santos asked. She slipped on the back porch, bruised a rib. "Spent 2 nights in observation. Rebecca had her temporarily transferred to Sunset for rehab, but Dot hated it." Santos narrowed her eyes. So the mother of the woman who sold the hat and Dorothy were both in the same facility. Ellie nodded slowly, but Dot's stay was short, barely a week. It might have been enough. Santos dug deeper. Sunset Manor belonged to a multi-state chain of elder care homes. Several had outstanding OSHA violations. 2 were under investigation for medical negligence. The dots, once faint, were connecting fast. Back in the containment room, Dorothy had asked for a piece of paper. She clutched it in her lap, her handwriting shaking, as she listed every item she remembered from the estate sale. Every detail about the house, Patricia's words, even the wallpaper. She handed it to Santos during the next examination. Santos reviewed it carefully, then glanced up. Dorothy, did your daughter ever help clean out your house last year? Dorothy frowned. Rebecca? Yes, when I was in the hospital. Did she sell anything without telling you? Dorothy's lips parted. She sold my grandmother's armoire. Said it was too big. She may have sold more than that. Santos laid out the findings gently. Multiple heirlooms sold at the Elm Street estate sale were traced back to Dorothy's family, items Rebecca had taken during her mother's hospitalization, including the hat. The implications settled like ash in the room. She sold it, Dorothy whispered. She sold my mother's hat. Santos hesitated. It's possible she didn't know. But someone did, Dorothy said. Someone planted those things. Santos nodded grimly. We think this wasn't accidental. Sunset Manor may be tied to a larger operation. Ellie clenched her fists. Are you saying they're using old people? As what, test subjects? We don't know yet, but the pattern is starting to emerge. That night, Mickey arrived from Chicago. He hadn't been able to sleep since his last phone call with his grandmother. Seeing her through the glass, pale and silent, shook him more than he expected. He demanded answers, and when he learned about the hat, about Sunset Manor, about the infestation, something hardened in him. I need to know who did this, he told Santos, and we're going to find out, she promised. In a quiet moment, Dorothy turned toward the window. Ellie stood on one side, Mickey on the other. Dorothy lifted a hand to the glass. This wasn't just about a hat, she said. This was a message. Someone thought I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't matter. Her voice trembled. They were wrong. Kathy Williams didn't sleep that night. Long after her shift ended, she sat in the break room of Cedar Rapids Family Clinic. A lukewarm coffee clutched between her hands. The lights were dim, the halls silent, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. She kept seeing the larvae, the way they moved, the smell from Dorothy's wound, the way Dr. Richardson's jaw tightened when he saw them wriggling in the saline basin. But most of all, she kept thinking of her mother. Margaret Williams had died a year ago in Sunset Manor. She'd gone in for recovery after a minor stroke. It was supposed to be temporary, 2 weeks, maybe 3. Kathy visited every other day, brought her crossword puzzles, new slippers, even old photos to cheer her up. But her mother never really recovered. Within 10 days she was suddenly gone. Natural causes, they said. Respiratory failure, nothing unusual for an 82-year-old woman with high blood pressure. But something about it had always gnawed at her. Her mother had complained of dizziness, of headaches, of a strange pulsing behind her ears. Kathy had asked questions, but the staff had been vague, unconcerned. The death certificate was clean, clinical, final, and now, Dorothy Henderson, similar symptoms, same facility. Kathy stood, her decision already made. She returned to the staff computers, logged in with her credentials, and pulled every file she could. Find on patients recently discharged or deceased from Sunset Manor in the last 18 months. It didn't take long to spot the pattern. A spike in short-term admissions, many of them transferred from hospitals for minor procedures, hip replacements, falls, dehydration, all elderly, all supposedly stable. But then, within 2 weeks, rapid decline, death, often listed as respiratory or cardiac failure, no autopsies. And some of those patients, like Dorothy, had returned home for a short while before symptoms began. Kathy printed everything. By sunrise, she was knocking on Dr. Richardson's office door. He looked up from his desk, still bleary-eyed from back-to-back calls with the CDC. Kathy, we need to talk, she said, stepping inside. Now. She laid the files on his desk. He scanned the first few pages, then the next. His eyebrows knit. These are all from Sunset Manor? Every single one. He flipped faster. Jesus. Dr. Richardson, she said, her voice low and shaking slightly. I think they're experimenting, and I think my mother was one of their victims. He looked up, face pale. We need to tell Santos. By midday, the CDC had initiated a federal escalation. The evidence Kathy provided was enough to trigger a full field investigation. Within hours, the FBI was on site. Special Agent Manuel Rodriguez was the first to arrive. A lean, composed man with sharp eyes and a quiet voice that somehow carried weight. He reviewed the files with Santos in the clinic's makeshift command center. This is more than elder neglect, he said. This is systematic exposure. possibly non-consensual human experimentation. Santos nodded grimly. They're targeting vulnerable seniors, transient patients, short-term admissions, people who won't be missed, and they're covering it with natural deaths. What about a motive? Santos pulled up a set of internal financial documents the CDC's legal team had subpoenaed just that morning. The parent company that owns Sunset Manor is linked to a pharmaceutical firm in Brazil, BioVitalis. They specialize in anti-aging therapies and recently began trials involving parasitic enzymes as catalysts for cell regeneration. Rodriguez leaned back, jaw tightening. They're testing on real people without consent. Santos nodded. And they're using contaminated personal items to spread the organisms, then laundering those items through estate sales to destroy the evidence. Rodriguez turned toward the glass window where Dorothy lay resting. She survived. That makes her the most valuable witness we've got. At that moment, Mickey was pacing the hallway outside. He'd overheard just enough to make his stomach churn. His voice cracked when he spoke. She was targeted? Rodriguez nodded. We believe the hat was deliberately contaminated, likely by someone connected to the facility. Mickey's jaw clenched. This wasn't an accident. Someone tried to kill my mother. That's how we see it. Ellie was beside him, her hand on his arm. Dot's not just a victim, she's a survivor, and she won't let this go. Inside the containment room, Dorothy sat upright for the first time in days. Her strength was returning slowly, but her face remained pale, her eyes shadowed. She was watching the birds outside, not real ones. Painted decals on the windows to prevent collisions. One of them was a red cardinal, faded but still vibrant against the glass. When Richardson entered, she looked at him and smiled faintly. Harold always said cardinals were good luck. Richardson sat beside her. You were right, Dot, about the hat, about everything. Her smile faded. How many others? We're still counting. She nodded slowly. Then I want to speak, when the time comes. I want them to know what they did. You'll get your chance. Later that afternoon, Rodriguez, Santos, and a federal legal team met with Mickey and Ellie to brief them on the next steps. We're preparing to raid multiple facilities linked to Sunset's parent company, Rodriguez said. We believe contaminated items may have been distributed across at least 5 states, Santos added, and we'll need Dorothy's testimony. She'll be under protection, and we'll ensure she receives full medical care at no cost. Mickey nodded. We'll do whatever it takes. That evening, Kathy returned to Dorothy's room in full gear. She held a framed photo in her gloved hand. My mom, she said softly. Margaret Williams. She was at Sunset, too. Dorothy studied the photo for a long moment. She has your eyes. Kathy blinked hard. They said she died of heart failure, but now, I think they were experimenting on her, just like they did to you. I'm so sorry, Dorothy said. Kathy looked up. You survived. You're going to help expose them. That means something. Dorothy reached out and gently took her hand through the gloves. We'll do it together, she said. As night fell, FBI agents moved into position around Sunset Manor's Cedar Rapids facility. Warrants were signed. Evidence teams mobilized. Rodriguez stood by the lead vehicle, earpiece in, heart steady. Inside the clinic, Dorothy finally slept. For the first time since the pain began, her dreams were peaceful. But the war had only just begun. Rebecca arrived at the clinic with a rolling suitcase and an agenda. Her heels clicked against the tile as she walked past the front desk, expression tight and jaw locked. Her flight from Phoenix had been delayed twice, and by the time she stepped into the CDC's command center, exhaustion mixed poorly with guilt and years of resentment. She barely glanced at Mickey, who stood near the observation glass. Is she conscious? Rebecca asked, dropping her purse into a chair. Mickey nodded, arms crossed. She's resting. Finally, Rebecca exhaled. Then we need to make a plan. Mickey turned slowly. A plan? She needs to be transferred to a long-term care facility as soon as she's stable. Somewhere secure, medically equipped, professionally managed. Mickey stared at her. She just survived being infected by weaponized parasites, and you're already trying to put her in a home? Rebecca stiffened. This isn't about what I want, it's about what she needs. No, this is about what you think she needs. She doesn't get a say. She's clearly not in a position to make rational decisions right now. Because she didn't tell us she was sick? Or because she didn't want to admit she was scared? Rebecca's tone sharpened. She let something live inside her for almost 2 weeks. That isn't just fear, Mickey. That's dangerous denial. And maybe she knew if she told us, we'd do exactly this. Their voices rose, drawing glances from nearby personnel. She's alone, Mickey. She's been alone for years. We visit for holidays, call when we remember, and then we expect her to be honest when she's in pain. Mickey said nothing. Rebecca pressed on, quieter now. This isn't about punishment. It's about safety, about preventing something like this from ever happening again. Santos entered the room mid-argument, clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable. "We're ready for a family consultation," she said. "We'd like both of you present." Inside the consultation room, Dorothy sat upright in bed, thin blankets drawn around her shoulders. Her skin was pale, her hair flattened from days in isolation, but her eyes, those deep, enduring eyes, were clear and watchful. Rebecca approached slowly. "Hi, Mom." Dorothy didn't answer. Mickey sat beside her. Santos took the lead. "We've made progress in stabilizing the infection. The larvae have stopped advancing, and our teams believe we can attempt experimental pharmacological removal within the next 48 hours. Rebecca frowned. "Experimental?" Santos nodded. "The antidote is unapproved by the FDA for use in humans. It's based on enzymes the original parasites were engineered from. We've seen success in animal models. So you want to use it on my mother?" Dorothy raised her hand weakly. "I'm still here." Everyone fell silent. "I'm not a file, or a project, or someone to be shuffled between medical charts." Rebecca looked away. "I'm just trying to do what's best. I know what you're trying to do. You've been trying to do it for years." The air in the room thickened. "I may be old, but I'm not done," Dorothy said. "I still live in here. I remember who I was, who I still am." Santos leaned forward. "Dorothy, the truth is, without this medication, we don't have a clear path forward. Surgery would almost certainly result in full hearing loss, possibly worse." "I want the treatment," Dorothy said. Rebecca stood. "Absolutely not. It's not your choice," Dorothy said, calm but fierce. "Not this time." Santos looked between them. "Legally, she retains full decision-making capacity. We can proceed if she consents." Rebecca's face twisted. Mickey spoke up, his voice measured but resolute. "What's insane is pretending like Mom hasn't earned the right to choose how she lives. And how she fights." Rebecca turned toward him, eyes burning. "You think this is heroic? That she's some martyr now? I think she's a human being, and you forgot that somewhere along the way." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, with years of unsaid things, buried grievances, abandoned conversations. Dorothy looked at her daughter. "I don't hate you, Rebecca, but I'm not living for your peace of mind." Rebecca said nothing. Later, as the room cleared, Mickey stayed behind. He pulled a small speaker from his bag, placed it on the side table. "You remember this?" he asked. Dorothy smiled. "Dad's jazz collection." He pressed play. A soft, crackling piano melody filled the room. "Fly Me to the Moon." Dorothy closed her eyes, tears leaking slowly down her cheeks. Harold had played this song at their wedding, had danced with her to it in the kitchen, had whispered it in her ear the last night before the surgery that took him. "I miss him," she said softly. "I do too," Mickey whispered. A few hours later, Kathy visited again. She brought a sketchbook and a set of colored pencils. "For when you're tired of all the data," she said. Dorothy smiled as she took them. The CDC administered the experimental compound that evening. They explained every step, every risk. Dorothy nodded through it all. She wanted to fight. She wanted to hear the Cardinals again. And she wanted to prove, if only to herself, that even after everything, she was still hers to command. For 36 hours, the clinic held its breath. The experimental treatment had been administered with precision, enzyme inhibitors paired with targeted antibodies, designed to force the larvae from the tissue and halt their progression. At first, things looked promising. Dorothy's pain receded. Her fever broke. The swelling in her ear reduced significantly. Nurses reported that she was resting easier, even humming softly to herself in the early morning hours. But by the third day, something changed. Her blood pressure spiked. Her temperature returned with force. And worst of all, a strange discoloration appeared behind her right jawline, angry, mottled, and pulsating faintly beneath the skin. Dr. Santos was the first to see it. She called for immediate imaging. The results were alarming. "There's a new cluster," she told the team grimly. "Deeper, closer to the brainstem. It's not responding to the compound. And it's growing faster." Richardson stared at the scans, aghast. "We didn't see this in the original infection. Could it be a mutation?" "It's more than that," Santos replied. "It's a variant, a secondary strain, likely more resilient, potentially designed to activate if the primary colony is attacked." Someone in the room swore softly. "We've never seen anything like this," Santos continued. "It's structured, intelligent. This wasn't just biological contamination. This was a weapon." By the time Mickey arrived, Dorothy was awake but disoriented. She struggled to sit up, her voice hoarse. I thought it was over." He took her hand. "They're working on it. You're strong, Mom. You've made it this far." She gave him a tired smile. "I don't feel strong. I feel like a host." CDC command scrambled to regroup. If this strain had made it into other patients, a larger outbreak could be imminent. But isolating and understanding the variant required live observation, preferably in a still conscious host, one showing symptoms but not yet in critical decline. Only one candidate fit those criteria. Dorothy Santos called for an emergency ethics review. In a locked conference room, the mood was tense. "If we intervene now, surgically, we have a 40% chance of saving her hearing. But the extraction could cause permanent nerve damage," said Richardson. "If we wait even 48 hours, Santos countered, "we risk her declining past the point of recovery, but we'd gather invaluable data." "Let's be honest," Rodriguez added. "If this spreads, it's not going to stop at Iowa. You've got 6 facilities under federal lockdown across 4 states. This could be the tip of a weaponized research iceberg." Mickey stormed into the meeting uninvited, eyes blazing. "You're not turning her into a science project." Santos stood her ground. "We're trying to stop a potential epidemic." "She's not a lab rat," Mickey said. "She's my mother." "No one is denying her humanity," Santos replied quietly. "But her case could unlock what's happening, how it evolves, how to stop it." "She already gave you everything," Mickey said. "Her samples, her story, her dignity." Rodriguez stepped between them. "We're not forcing anything. This will be her choice. But you need to understand, lives could be saved by waiting just a little longer." Mickey clenched his fists. "You want her to risk dying so that strangers might have a better chance at survival?" "Yes," Santos said, without apology. Silence fell. Later that evening, Dorothy was briefed privately. She sat in bed, the fading afternoon sun warming her blanket. Santos explained the new findings with care. No drama, no sugarcoating. Dorothy listened quietly. When Santos finished, Dorothy closed her eyes. "Why me?" "Because you survived the first wave," Santos said. "Because your body didn't give in. And because you're the only one who can help us understand what's coming." Dorothy turned her head. "And if I wait, if I let it grow, we might find the answers to stop it. But we also might lose you." Dorothy was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "I don't want to die in a room full of strangers." Santos nodded. "I understand. I want to go home." Mickey stepped in then, placing a hand on her arm. His voice cracked. "You still can. We'll get you out of here. We'll do the surgery. We'll fight." Dorothy looked at him with eyes full of both love and sorrow. Fighting doesn't always mean staying. He knelt beside her bed, tears brimming. "I'm not ready." She smiled faintly. "Neither am I." Back in the hallway, Rebecca was waiting. Mickey approached slowly. "She's refusing to wait." Rebecca didn't speak for a moment. Then quietly, "She's the bravest person I know." Mickey looked at his sister. "You mean that?" "I do." They stood in silence together, for once united in something beyond disagreement. The next morning, Dorothy signed the consent for surgical extraction. It would happen in 12 hours. "Enough time," Santos said, "to run final tests and prepare an emergency response team." Dorothy asked to be moved out of isolation for a few minutes. Santos hesitated, then agreed. In a sealed, sanitized courtyard on the clinic rooftop, they wheeled her out under the open sky. The winter sun was soft, weak, but it touched her skin like a promise. Kathy joined her, sitting nearby with a thermos of mint tea. "Any regrets?" she asked softly. Dorothy shook her head. "Not one. Not even the estate sale." Dorothy chuckled. "That $12 hat brought justice." brought my children home, turned my body into a battlefield for something bigger than me. She took a sip of tea. Not bad, huh? The sky shifted. A gust of wind sent dry leaves skittering across the concrete, and then a sound. A single bird call. Dorothy looked up sharply. A cardinal landed on the edge of the rooftop garden, its red feathers glowing in the light. She smiled. "Harold," she whispered. "You old flirt." Dorothy didn't pray before the surgery. She'd done enough praying in her life. For Harold's remission, for her children, safety, for her own heart not to break when the house grew too quiet. But now, lying on the operating table, her hands resting calmly at her sides, all she felt was clarity. She wasn't afraid. Dr. Richardson stood beside the surgical team, hands sterilized, mask on. Santos watched from the observation deck above, clipboard in hand, but her expression was no longer clinical. It was personal now. This woman had helped expose a system designed to silence people like her. She had dared to fight, and now, against every statistic, Dorothy was going to survive. The surgery lasted 3 hours. The biofilm protecting the variant colony had spread dangerously close to Dorothy's facial nerve. It required a level of precision that left no room for error. But the CDC's biomedical team, using refined derivatives of the original parasite's proteins, had developed a compound that weakened the larvae without harming the host tissue. When it was over, Richardson removed his gloves and looked through the window. "She made it," he said. Mickey, waiting outside the OR, sank into a chair and covered his face. Ellie, beside him, simply whispered, "Thank you." Rebecca cried silently in the corner. The first thing Dorothy heard, really heard, when she woke up was the sound of her heartbeat on the monitor. Then, slowly, softly, another sound filtered in. Chirping. Bird song. Her eyes fluttered open. The curtain was drawn back, revealing a small speaker placed near the window. Mickey had loaded it with recordings of Iowa bird songs. Cardinals, finches, robins. A ridiculous idea, he'd thought at first. But somehow it worked. Dorothy wept, not because she had survived, but because, for the first time in months, her body felt like her own again. Recovery came faster than expected. Her hearing returned gradually, first a muffled thrum, then full clarity. The CDC confirmed the parasite colony had been fully eradicated, and no nerve damage remained. A miracle, they called it. The real miracle, Dorothy thought, was that she'd been believed, that her voice had mattered. Meanwhile, the investigation exploded into national headlines. The FBI, working with the CDC and Kathy's documentation, raided 5 more elder care facilities across the Midwest, hidden beneath layers of shell corporations, whistleblower suppression, and falsified medical records. They uncovered the truth. Sunset Manor had been part of an illegal clinical testing program. Over 400 elderly patients had been exposed to genetically modified parasites, designed to stimulate regenerative cell responses with the promise of reversing signs of aging. In reality, the program had caused dozens of deaths, all recorded as natural causes. BioVitalis, the company funding the research, had already profited millions from pre-market investor hype, despite never receiving FDA approval. Patricia Whitmore, the woman who sold Dorothy the hat, had been a silent mule tasked with liquidating contaminated personal items from deceased patients to eliminate evidence. In exchange, she'd received cash settlements that paid for her mother's care. When the truth came out, she broke down during federal interrogation. "I didn't know what they put in the hats," she sobbed. "They just said to sell everything, to make it go away." She was later indicted for obstruction and accessory to human experimentation. Rodriguez held a press conference 2 weeks later. Dorothy Henderson's survival wasn't just luck, he told reporters. It was perseverance. She fought through something most wouldn't have survived. And because of her, justice will reach the people who thought the elderly could be used, discarded, and forgotten. Dorothy watched the broadcast from her room, Mickey beside her, his hand wrapped around hers. "They didn't break me," she said softly. "No," Mickey agreed. "They did the opposite." When Dorothy was discharged, the city of Cedar Rapids held a small gathering at the library auditorium. Dozens of families, whose loved ones had once stayed at Sunset Manor, came forward. Some shared grief, others offered thanks. Rebecca took the stage near the end. "My mother was a school teacher for 40 years, she said, voice shaking. She taught children how to find their voice. But in the end, she taught me how to use mine." Applause followed. Dorothy, seated in the front row, blinked back tears. That fall, part of her settlement, nearly $2 million in restitution and damages, was used to renovate her home into a multi-generational living space. Mickey left his job in Chicago to move in, converting Harold's old breakfast nook into a consulting corner where he worked remotely. Rebecca visited every week. She became a vocal advocate for senior rights, helping draft legislation requiring stricter medical oversight of elder care facilities. Dorothy's days returned to rhythm. Bird feeders were filled again. Cinnamon rolls were baked on Sundays. Ellie came for bridge every Thursday. The hat, cleaned, decontaminated, and preserved, now sat in a glass display box in the living room. Next to it, a stack of handwritten letters from Harold, discovered tucked inside the hat's lining. Love notes from decades past. "You carried him," Dorothy whispered to the hat one night, "even when I couldn't." The Henderson Foundation for Senior Rights launched that winter. Based out of the repurposed sunroom, now painted a cheerful goldenrod, the foundation connected whistleblowers, researchers, and families across the country. Dorothy, now 77, gave a keynote at the National Patient Protection Summit via livestream. "I'm not a scientist," she told them. "I'm not a politician. I'm just someone who was supposed to stay quiet. But surviving makes you a witness. And once you've seen the truth, silence is no longer an option." Her words echoed far beyond the conference room. By spring, over 50 facilities had been audited, and 3 more companies were under investigation. One afternoon, while making tea, Mickey walked into the kitchen holding his phone. Mrs. Patterson called again. "Her mother in Des Moines has symptoms like yours. The FBI wants your input on the case." Dorothy nodded. "Send them what they need." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "Mickey? Yeah? Thank you." He smiled. "For what?" "For coming home." That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Rebecca's teenage daughter helping set the table, Mickey chopping vegetables, Ellie arguing about card game rules, the sound of birds filtered through the open window. Cardinals, finches, a mockingbird. Dorothy paused, hands dusted with flour, and looked toward the feeder. "They're back," she said. Ellie looked up. "Who?" "The birds. Good omen?" Dorothy nodded. "The best." She stepped outside alone for a moment, standing under the soft dusk sky. The air was cool, filled with the promise of something mended, and as she listened to the birds, really listened, with both ears working, with no pain, no fear, she felt it again. That click in the soul, that sensation of presence, of being seen. She was not invisible. She was not expendable. She had survived. And now, her story would do what her voice had always done. Teach. Sometimes it only takes one voice, one grandmother, one survivor, to expose the truth and change the course of justice. Dorothy Henderson was never just a victim. She was a teacher, a mother, and a woman who refused to disappear quietly. Her story reminds us that dignity has no expiration date, and that even when the world stops listening, we still matter. As the sun sets behind her Cedar Rapids home, Dorothy sits by the window, wrapped in a warm shawl, listening to the birdsong drifting through the open glass. A bright red cardinal perches outside, as if keeping watch. Beside her, the once haunted vintage hat now rests under protective glass, no longer a threat, but a symbol of all she overcame. Her fingers gently trace a love letter tucked beside it, a quiet smile forming as if Harold were still beside her. The house is filled with soft voices, Mickey laughing with the kids, Rebecca setting the table, and in that moment, peace and presence are one. Have you or someone you love ever felt invisible, dismissed, forgotten, simply because of age? Share your story in the comments below. Let your voice be heard, because stories like these don't just remind us of pain, they remind us of power. And if this story moved you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We're building a community where every voice, no matter how old, is worth hearing. Because surviving is just the beginning.